I love a book with a grovel, and this book had chef's kiss level grovel. The chemistry between Noah and Mackenzie was absolutely palpable, and I DNF'd that. Honestly, I tried so hard to read the book. Chemistry between Adam and Olive was off the charts, an onion of tropes with many layers, if you may say. I was absolutely not prepared for a foot fetish to be part of the book. Hey, hi, hello. Welcome in or welcome back to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Today, we're going to be going through the 30 books that I read in January and February 2025. I will say that there were a few novellas in there, so that's why I was able to read 30. There were 2 DNFs in there. I know that's a lot of reading for most people, but let me live. With so many books, I'm gonna go through a rapid review of each. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the book, definitely check them out on whatever platform you're reading on to read the full description, because I'll just give a little snippet into what the book is about, along with my general thoughts and ratings on each book. A few of these were arcs. I recently got into NetGalley and reviewing advanced reader copies. For the reviews today, I'm gonna lump some of the series together since I did read some things a little out of order, kind of jumped between series, so I just kind of lumped them together for simplicity. I started out the year with the Tooth and Claw series by Heather Guerre. This is Cold-Hearted, Hot-Blooded, and Once Bitten. I ended up reading the 3 books that are out totally out of order, mainly because I heard super good reviews on the 3rd book, Once Bitten. So I actually started there. I don't think I had any issues in reading the series out of order, just because they are interconnected standalones with different characters. I did end up liking it so much that I went back and then read 1 and 2. The 4th book in the series, Twice Shy, should be forthcoming. The author previously had a release date, and then it got canceled and moved back because the author wanted to rewrite the book a little bit. She wasn't exactly happy with it. So I'm super excited to read the 4th book whenever it does come out. I am fully sat and waiting. I will be probably pre-ordering it, even though most of the books are on Kindle Unlimited. I just really want to support the author just because her writing is so beautiful, and I really loved the series so far. The series itself contains humans, werewolves, and vampires, so there's a lot of kind of interplay between those groups. Cold-Hearted is a romance that focuses on a human woman and a werewolf man. It has kind of a grumpy sunshine type trope. The woman has some background trauma with her ex-boyfriend, and without spoiling anything, a lot of things go down. It gets pretty tense, as well as having a really sweet, slow burn romance between both of the main characters. One of the things that really stood out in this book for me was the cast of characters around the main couple. It was super lively, and it was really great to be able to get really into the pack and their dynamics, how everyone works together in this really small town. The only kind of downside I would say to the book was that it was a very slow burn for the first 50%, and then after that 50%, it ended up being just kind of instant love. I still loved the book all around, and I gave it 4.25 out of 5 stars. Hot-Blooded was next. This was an incredibly sweet romance between a vampire man, Amos, and a human woman, Tessa, who is a blood donor. They get paired up as part of a blood donor service to vampires. This book really seemed super necessary to describe some of the vampire lore, since the 1st book, Cold-Blooded, focused a lot on the werewolf dynamics and pack. This book, in contrast, was very heavily on the vampire side, including some of their background, political structure, how different things within the world work regarding vampires. I will say I thought the romance in this one was super incredible. I loved it, but there really wasn't any plot, anything to like dig into. There was a slight bit of action towards the end, but nothing really huge in the overall plot of the series happens from it. I did end up giving it a 3.75 out of 5 stars, and that's mostly because the romance side, there really wasn't much happening from a plot standpoint. And then Once Bitten, which is the third book, which I had actually read first in the series, this one absolutely blew me away. I had seen so many recommendations off of Reddit to read this book, primarily on the romance subreddit. I kept seeing it pop up, and that's why I jumped into that one first. It focused on a human woman, Jules, and a werewolf man, Max. Jules had been in a previous abusive relationship with her husband, and Max really helps her heal from that. They fall in love. They go on a super romantic camping trip together. And then about halfway through the book, a major thing happens that you can't really see coming. It's not hinted at. It has a major impacts into the plot. It takes the story to a whole nother level. I love a book with a grovel, and this book had just chef's kiss level grovel, and I couldn't expect anything more. I think I cried multiple times while reading. I just was absolutely blown away. I kept thinking about it after reading it. I probably will eventually go back and reread it at some point because I liked it that much, but super highly recommend. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The series as a whole, the fourth book, I'm super excited to read it. The first book and the third book really tie together. The couple from the first book shows up as side characters. I think you really could read them independently if you wanted to. The fourth book does seem like that's going to take a lot of what's happened and maybe put it all together. We'll see where that goes. All right, next book, Masquerade of Bones by J. Ember Hintz. This was an arc that had a release date of February 25th. I ended up DNFing this super early to the point where I didn't give it a star rating because that wouldn't be fair. What I could glean from what I did read it, which was about the first 3 chapters, I was really confused, and that's the main reason why I put it down. It didn't really have a strong description of the world building. There were a lot of players, some magic, something happening with witches and conscription into some sort of service. I couldn't really get what was going on. People would be talking and referencing things like relics. There was no description of those things or what was happening. It's probably something where you just have to buckle in, power through it until you pick it up and figure it out. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood to try and decipher what the world was and how it worked. But that's the main reason why I put that one down. I wanted a glossary or maybe even a prologue with a description of a little bit of how they got to the point they were in the world. I just felt so lost that I had to cut it off and put it down. The next book I read was Designed for Disaster by Leslie North. This one I picked up as an arc, but I pretty much had read it after its release anyway. The book itself is also on Kindle Unlimited. This was a fast-paced contemporary romance with a grumpy sunshine type of trope and some fake dating sprinkled in. Natasha does furniture commissions. Trent is kind of a billionaire furniture company owner looking to do a commission for his grandmother. What I really liked about this book was that the characters were pretty realistic. Their motivations made sense. There was really great chemistry between the main characters. The side characters were really interesting, and it makes me want to read the previous books in the series. I believe this is the third out of the series so far, with the other books focusing on the other men in the friend group. So I might actually go back and read those just because I really loved the writing and the character descriptions, the chemistry between the characters. I really thought this was a really well put together book. Overall, I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars. And now I read 2 additional arcs. So The Love Haters by Katherine Center and It's a Love Story by Annabel Monaghan. I won't be reviewing those in this video because I am planning to do a video of them shortly after they release in May. I did end up really liking them both, and I think they're going to be really big summer reading books this summer. The Love Haters comes out May 20th. It's a Love Story comes out May 27th. Close together, within a week of each other, they're coming out. I imagine we're going to see them everywhere across Book Talk, BookTube. They're pretty big authors already, so they're pretty big anticipated books for this summer. I also read The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. This book was about two bisexual exes, Theo and Kit. They break up before going on a food and wine tour across Europe. But in their breakup, they end up not going on the tour and getting a voucher to attend the tour at a later time. Turns out they both schedule that tour on the same date and end up together after a long time apart from each other and no contact. They end up being a bit friendly with each other and somehow end up in a hookup competition with each other. They want to try to see who can hook up with the most people during that food and wine tour. Obviously, that gets a little messy and they have some lingering feelings for each other. It is really a beautiful story, along with having such great scenery of Europe. I absolutely love this book and I could see myself reading it again. The scenery was so beautiful. The characters seem so real and lively. The writing and the humor, the flowery descriptions of things, it really, really made me take a step back and think. After I had read paragraphs, I would go back and then read them again just because they were so beautiful or so impactful. Theo and Kit, you learn that they have a long relationship together as they were growing up before they fell in love and then broke up. And obviously this story does have a happy ending. Theo and Kit have extreme chemistry together. They have great banter. I will say that this book did feel, again, like a really great summer read just because of the scenery, and each chapter they're kind of visiting another city, another town, really transports you and takes you along with them on their travels. Overall, I gave it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. This is an older book. It's a story about Bree, who has some background trauma that you find out and learn about throughout the story, and Archer, who does not have a voice. He communicates in ASL. Bree knows ASL, so they kind of bond together. Archer is kind of this hermit that the townspeople don't know too much about. He can't speak, so he doesn't talk to people around the town. They kind of treat him a little differently, a little bit of an outsider. What I loved so much about this book was that Archer ends up becoming just absolutely obsessed with Bree. He does some wild things like picking out folded chips within a chip bag because he knows that she loves the folded ones. He gives her a bowl of them, so he's sorted out chips. He does those little tiny things that are just so over the top, proof that he's in love with her. They just have so many cute moments together. The book is slightly cheesy, but I can get over that just because of how obsessed Archer is with Bree. This book was obviously written to be a pretty big emotional roller coaster type book, so it really takes you kind of up and down with your emotions. There's some action thrown in. It just is really, really a great story. And overall, I gave it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. Next up is Santa Overboard by Carolyn McBride. This was an arc of the audiobook. It is also available on Kindle Unlimited, and I did read this after it had been released, even though it was the arc of the audiobook. This book is really hard to describe because it's really about a woman kind of growing into herself and allowing herself to make the jump forward into a new relationship. You don't really see the relationship forming, it's already there, but it's more of her allowing herself to fully give into a relationship after she had previously failed relationships before. And everything really happens on a backdrop of a Christmas boat parade. There were a lot of small town Christmas vibes in this one, and there was also a really heavy emphasis on COVID. I think COVID was brought up like every chapter. Everyone would talk about the impacts of COVID on their lives. Was a flashback to the COVID times that I didn't necessarily appreciate or want or even expected from the book. And then this book is marketed as a romance, but the book just was so meandering in talking about different townspeople, their personal problems in their relationships, working through things. At one point they go to a bonfire and are praying. I honestly couldn't give you a solid direction of where that book was going or truly what it all was about. I feel like it's something that even if you listen to the audiobook, you could put it on in the background and just totally not know what's going on, jump in and listen to it and maybe get like a snippet of a little story and then move on with your day. It didn't really have any overarching plot. I did end up giving it a 2.5 out of 5 stars, but even that, looking back on it now, I can't even believe that I gave it that high. Like, I probably should have given it somewhere around 1.75, 1.5. It just had no direction. After it was done, I felt like I couldn't even give it a summary because I had no idea what I just read. The next book is The Fake Mate by Laura Ferguson. This is about Mackenzie and Noah, who are both doctors at the same hospital. This is an Omega-verse novel. Mackenzie is an Omega and Noah is a Alpha at the hospital. In this world, the Alphas kind of get hassled for not having a mate just because that can make them be viewed as a little bit more aggressive. So they end up fake dating. Mackenzie has a family member who consistently asks her to go out on dates and she's frustrated. So they decide, you know what, let's just fake date. I'll get my family off my back for Mackenzie, and Noah will be able to move forward at his job without extra discrimination against his alpha status. And of course, they end up falling in love. I loved every moment of this book, even though parts of it were a little bit predictable, but it honestly gives you exactly what you think it's going to give you from reading the book description, which is highly appreciated. It felt like a grumpy sunshine dynamic, but the chemistry between Noah and Mackenzie was absolutely palpable. I did really appreciate that the story was fast-paced and it really just dove right into that fake dating relationship. Basically, from maybe the first or second chapter, they were right into it. I had a great time, and this was my first Lana Ferguson book, but I do have plans to read a lot more of her books. I really love her writing style, the way that she writes her characters, the dialogue. It's all really, really great. So I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Huge, big name. I've read so many of her books so far. She's a really, really favorite author of mine. I've read a lot of her STEM romances, but this was her first jump into the paranormal romance genre. This is about Misery, a vampire, and an alpha werewolf Lo. They end up in an arranged marriage, and this is kind of due to some of the world building, which is pretty intricate. Divide between humans, vampires, and werewolves. There had previously been kind of a large amounts of animosity between those groups. Misery ends up volunteering to take part in this arranged marriage with an alpha werewolf just to try to decrease tensions between the vampire and werewolf species. She volunteers in part because there's also a mystery subplot, Misery trying to find out what happens to her friend that had went missing, gets slowly uncovered as little puzzle pieces get revealed and put together throughout the story as it comes to a kind of big action-filled conflict and resolution at the end. I really liked the world building in this. It really set up a really interesting dynamic between those werewolf, vampire, and human groups. The characters felt really developed, and because of that strong world building, their motivations made a lot of sense. The book itself was from Misery's POV, but the start of each chapter has a kind of sentence or little snippets of Lo's POV. So even though you're listening to Misery's point of view through the whole story, you do see a little viewpoint into Lo's mind. This book does have a he fell first and harder trope, which is really, really well done and supported by those little snippets at the start of the chapters. The plot was pretty intricate and made use of a lot of the side characters that get brought up and mentioned, and I ended up giving this one a 5 out of 5 stars. This was my first 5-star of the year. The 5 stars is well deserved, and I'm absolutely pumped for Mate, which is the next book in the series. That one's going to be covering Misery's best friend and her mate. That book has a release date of October 7th at the moment. Keep an eye out for that one. I'm sure that's going to be huge. Bride had a ton of reviews on Book Talk BookTube, so I imagine Mate is going to be right there with it. The people that loved Bride are probably going to be fiending to pick up a copy of Mate. I know I've already pre-ordered it, so really loved the book, super excited for the next one. Next up, we have Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. Huge book release in January. I read it pretty much immediately after it came out, mainly just to try and avoid spoilers online, follow all the subreddits, and see ads on Instagram and Facebook all over the place. I knew I was going to get spoiled if I didn't read it right away. I won't spend too much time describing this one because it's the third book in the Empyrean series after Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. I feel like if I talk about any of the plot points, that again is going to be a spoiler since it is still pretty relatively new in its release. I will give my overall thoughts in that I was kind of disappointed by this one. It really felt like a lot of filler within the series. I do think a lot of what was mentioned is going to end up being super important within the story overall. That is yet to be seen in books 4 and 5 that'll finish out the series, putting them right up here. I feel like the book just ended up presenting about 300 more questions and maybe gave like half of an answer. That was a little bit frustrating to me. There was a lot of world building, which I do think is really going to pay off in the future books. They ended up pretty much traveling place to place to place, learning a few things, getting a lot more questions. I do like that the relationship between Xaden and Violet did seem a lot more improved in the sense of Xaden not holding as many secrets from Violet. He was incredibly supportive of her throughout the book in standing up for her, letting her stand up for herself. I really, really enjoyed seeing the character growth between both of them and the growth of their relationship. The side characters were great and got a lot more screen time, especially within the traveling between different places within the world. I will say that I absolutely love Riddick so much. He is probably number one of my favorite characters after Violet and Xaden. I'm excited to see where that goes and incredibly scared because I like him so much. And we all know what happens to characters when you like them. Sometimes they don't make it out. The ending itself was pretty shocking, and I didn't really expect to see it coming. I did pick up on some of the things that had happened previously in the book that would hint to it. So I think Rebecca Yarros did an incredible job building up to that ending, and I can't wait to see what's going to be happening in books 4 and 5. Overall, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read New Moon and Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. So New Moon, this is a reread. I've read it at least once or twice before this. It wasn't new to me. I did jump into it immediately after Onyx Storm, and I think it's because Onyx Storm wasn't quite as angsty as I wanted it to be, and there is no more angsty book on this planet than New Moon by Stephanie Meyer. This was and still is a 5-star book for me. This one was my favorite of the series. I just really like how dark the book gets and how the emotions are described for Bella. And also I just really, really love Jacob. I was always team Jacob, so this book I think was kind of peak of that for the series, and I really ended up hoping that they would end up being together, but obviously she chose Edward, so yeah. And then Midnight Sun was actually my other DNF of the month, and I DNF'd that at 21%. Honestly, I tried so hard to read the book. I had bought it. I think I even pre-ordered it before it came out in like 2020, and I just never got around to reading it. I was hoping that it was going to be giving a little bit more to the story. Obviously, being Edward's POV, I've seen the movies for the Twilight series. Basically on a yearly basis, I watch them, and I was really hoping to get a little something more from the Twilight story to see it in Edward's POV. It's like 800 pages long, and how does it not add that much to the story? I don't understand how you can write 800 pages and be longer than the first book and not really have that much more insights from Edward's POV. I also fell asleep while reading it probably like 8 times because I was bored. At that point, I was like, all right, I'm just gonna DNF this and move on to something else. Next up, I read The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. Again, another Ali Hazelwood book. This one is one of her STEM romances. This is about Olive, who is a PhD student, and Adam, who is a professor at the same college. This is a fake dating relationship, and absolutely no surprise there, they end up falling for each other. One of the biggest things that really stuck out to me in the story was that Olive was demisexual. I don't think they ever actually named her being demisexual, but the way that she described herself and her feelings on sexuality was pretty much what demisexuality is, and that is incredibly hard to find representation of in books, so I really appreciated reading that. And also the chemistry between Adam and Olive was off the charts. The spice was great, their dialogue was snappy and fun. I just really appreciated reading their story together as they started falling in love with each other. Adam himself was absolutely book boyfriend material. I love Ali Hazelwood books, and I think I'm well on the way of reading them all. Eventually, I probably will. There's definitely some novellas out there that I haven't touched yet, but I've read most of her books and full-length novels. I just love her writing style, and at least with The Love Hypothesis, she starts out each chapter with a hypothesis that is kind of snarky and fun and gives a little insight into what might be happening in the chapter, Olive's thoughts at that time. It's just really cute, and I think it's a really creative way to add to the story. Overall, I gave it a 4.75 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Black Ties and White Lies by Kat Singleton. This was my first Kat Singleton novel. I kept seeing it on sponsored ads, and eventually I just broke down and was like, fine, it's on Kindle Unlimited. I guess I'll read it if you give me 800 ads on every social media platform. I am actually planning on including this in a video later. I will say the main takeaway that I took away from the book, this book was like the author tried to fit every single romance trope. It was like 18 layers of tropes, an onion of tropes with many layers, if you may say. It had boss employee, billionaire, grumpy sunshine, fake dating, secret dating, ex-boyfriend's brother, one bed, pretty much everything you can possibly fit in. And it felt like the story was being built around the tropes rather than them just naturally being part of the story. And even with that list, I'm probably missing a few, but overall I gave it a 2.25 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman and The Haunting of Blackwood House by Darcy Coates. I do have another video which you should check out that reviewed both of those books in a little bit more detail. Overall, I ended up giving them both 3.25 stars, even though they were completely different from each other. And then I also read the Legacy of God series. I had read the first book back in December 2024. Check out my part 1 and part 2 review of the whole series if you want to hear a little bit more about those. I ended up reading a lot of Ruby Dixon novellas. So I started out reading Prison Planet Barbarian. This was about Chloe, who's a human, and Jutari, who's a Masaka male, similar to the big blue aliens that are part of Ice Planet Barbarians and that whole universe of spin-off books. So Chloe encounters Jutari in this prison system where she's sent. It is a novella, but I don't know what it was about it. I just wanted more character development. And maybe it's not fair to expect that from a novella, but I feel like it spent so much time describing the prison system rather than Chloe and Jutari together. They end up doing a little prison escape mission, and that pretty much goes to plan. What happens is pretty predictable and gets hinted at multiple times before it happens. Things get wrapped up. It's a happy ending. Overall, I gave it a 2.75 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Barbarian's Treasure and Barbarian's Bride, which are the final 2 books in the Ice Planet Barbarian series. I actually held off on reading these because they both were flashbacks to the first days within the Ice Planet Barbarian series, couples that got together right off the bat. So Barbarian's Treasure, this was Megan and Cashel's story. I'm not really sure it brought that much to the series just because it had kind of a repeat of the themes that had already been covered in past books. Megan herself feeling a little bit uncomfortable in the world, wanting to prove herself that she had a spot there. She didn't want to be kicked out for any reason. There were also, of course, a big amount of miscommunications between Megan and Cashel. I will say, I was absolutely not prepared for a foot fetish to be part of the book. Each book itself, if you haven't read the series, covers different personality traits and even different kinks that get explored. And this one had an emphasis on foot fetishes, and that was maybe a little bit too much for me. Overall, I gave it a 3.25 out of 5 stars. It was cute. Probably didn't need to read that. And then Barbarian's Bride, which was Nora and Dagesh's story. This was the final book in the Ice Planet Barbarian series. Again, a flashback, not too much happens. They end up falling in love right away, and then the core of the story focuses on miscommunications, where Nora actually likes it a bit rougher in bed, and Dagesh is scared of hurting her or pushing her too far. So they end up with this miscommunication between them about their sexual preferences, and they slowly work that out, and it ends up being a healthy relationship between the both of them. The kink focus on this one was sort of light BDSM, which hasn't really been covered too much in the series, so that was kind of interesting to see. And then as the story wrapped up, it showed the tribe all together with their children. It was very cute. It felt like a good wrap up to that Ice Planet Barbarian series, so that the books in the Ice Home series can continue, as well as Ice Planet Clones, which I've read all of Ice Home, and I've read the 3 books that have been out so far in Ice Planet Clones. I will continue to read them. I love Ruby Dixon's writing and her books. Can't speak highly enough of how much I like Ruby Dixon. Overall, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And then I read the Ice Planet Honeymoon books, which is kind of a step back into the honeymoon stories of some of the first characters within the book. It's a set of 4 novellas focusing on Vectel and Georgie, Rahash and Liz, Ahako and Kira, and Rook and Harlow. I ended up reading these books on a plane when I was going on a vacation, and I was next to this really nice looking elderly lady while I was reading Alien Smut. So that was an experience, and I felt like I had to, tilt the iPad away because I had a window seat, and I just felt really weird reading this. Probably should have read this at home, but I did just want to read these stories and take a little step back into the Ice Planet Barbarian couples that were at the start of the book and just read these stories. They were really cute. They didn't really have much plot to them. It was a little snapshot of the couples together and the kind of earlier parts of their pregnancies. Overall, I gave Vectel and Georgie's 3.5 out of 5 stars. Rahash and Liz, I gave 3.25 stars. Ahako and Kira, I gave 3.5. And then Rook and Harlow, I gave 3.25. And then probably one of my favorites out of these books was Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonam-Young. This was an incredibly sweet contemporary romance book between Win and Bo. Win having a limb difference of a smaller hand and Bo being an amputee. Obviously with that, they both kind of bond a bit over their disabilities. You can see how they navigate the world with their disabilities and how that impacts them, their feelings on themselves. They end up having a one-night stand after both being pirates at a Halloween party. Win ends up finding out that she's pregnant. So that ends up bringing them together. Bo was a golden retriever type of a trope and also a massive nerd. Win is incredibly relatable, and the book is all from her POV. It actually made the book having a slow burn even more effective, so I really appreciated that. One of the most unique parts of this book was that Win has the same limb difference as the author, so it has a lot of really authentic and real sounding thoughts because the author is incredibly vulnerable in how she describes Win's feelings. It was really, really great to see that written within a book, the different adaptations she has to make within her life because she has a hand that is different than others. The book really skillfully mentions abortion and talks about that, as well as having a small section on postpartum depression, which has an impact in the story. So I think that the book really covers some super important and really authentic feelings surrounding those topics. The side characters were also really interesting, and I think it really showcased a really healthy adult relationship and how your friends support you along with your family. There really isn't any third act breakup. It is just a very sweet and cute contemporary romance as Win and Bo get to know each other and work through these huge life changes that an unexpected pregnancy brings. I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars, but this is probably one of my favorite books out of this whole reading review and wrap up. So those are all of the 30 books and novellas and 2 DNFs that I have read in the months of January and February 2025. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below if you've read any of these books. Do you want to read any of them? Do you have any recommendations of what I should read in March? I'll catch you in the next video.